Hi, and welcome back to the Tamarack Sew Along. In today's lesson, we'll be attaching our collar. Here we have our collar piece, and as you can see, it's been quilted in the same fashion as our jacket. If you haven't done that, do that now. Our first step will be pinning our collar to our neckline. Now, this will differ slightly depending which version of the coat you're making. Here, we're making version B with the snap overhang, and if you're making version A, where the two centers meet, it'll be slightly different, but I'll walk you through that now. On your collar, you're going to find your notches and also your center back. Now grab some pins, and we're going to start pinning our collar to our neckline. So to start, I like to find one of my notches, and that aligns with the shoulder seam. I'm going to put a pin there. And then I find the other notch and align that to the second shoulder seam. After that, I align the center back. And then from there, we need to align the front. So again, we're making version B with the overhang. So our collar will hit that notch. If you're making version A without the overhang, your collar will come to the edge. So pin, and then align the area between the neckline and the front. I'm going to place a pin between the center back and the shoulder seams. And then we're going to align the other front. Now that our collar is pinned in place, we're going to head over to our machine, and we're just going to baste within the 1/2 inch seam allowance to anchor the collar in place. All right, I'm going to baste at 3/8 of an inch. I'm not actually using a basting stitch, I'm just using my regular stitch length, but since it's within the seam allowance, it doesn't matter, nobody will see it. And baste along the neckline. You're going to make sure you don't feel any tucks. Since we're sewing something straight to a curve, Since we're sewing something straight to a curve, it is always possible to get a tuck under there. So just continue working across. And adjust as necessary. Make sure that your seam allowances are going through flat at your shoulders. Now once our collar is fully attached, we're going to press the seam allowance up and anchor it in place, and that will leave you with a not so great looking edge. So I like to conceal this with a piece of binding. You have two options for your binding. You can either cut a length of 1.5 inch binding, or you can take the binding you've already made and trim off 1/4 inch, so that'll just be in the fold. Like so. Because we're going to be sewing it, stitching, folding it up to cover the seam allowance, and then folding it back down to bind the edge. I'm going to just use my 1.5 inch binding that I cut separately because I want it to match the inside of my coat, and my binding that I had already pre-cut was for the outside. So once you have your binding, take your neckline edge, and the binding is going to need to be just slightly longer than your neckline. We're going to pin that. Just pin it along the neckline edge. And we're only going to bind the area along the collar. If you're making view B, we're not binding this extra point. So I'm just gonna trim those a bit so there's less to get in my way at the machine. We're gonna head over to the machine and we're gonna stitch through the binding, the jacket, and the collar using our 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, here we are back at the machine. Just gonna back tack, remove my pins. And again, we're gonna sew the length of the collar. At the end, you're going to want to back tack and then clip your threads. Now here we have our collar, jacket, and the binding. So what we're first going to do is press all the seam allowance and the binding up away from the jacket. You're going to have an easiest time doing this on a hand because of the curve. Now at this point, I'm going to cut off the extra binding that falls beyond the collar. So now what we're going to do is we're going to tuck the raw edge under. Make sure our collar is standing away nicely. We're going to pin. And you're just going to do this across the entire length of the neckline. This creates sort of a little collar stand for your collar and enables it to stand up nicely and fall. So just complete that across the neckline. Now we're going to head over to the machine and we're going to sew through the binding and the collar to anchor this in place. Oops, I hit a pin. You should try not to do that. Sorry. Now you can see our binding is stitched down on the back, and underneath we just have a little line following our seam line. All right, so that was a quick lesson for us today. Our colors are on. They look great inside and out. And in our next lesson, I'll be showing you how to assemble and attach the hood. After that, we'll be finishing the outside of the jacket. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our video updates. I'll see you back here next time. Bye-bye.